We need to have a standardized of pharmaceutical reps, the people that provide education, the doctors,
who is the chairman and CEO.
the fascination the public has, the impact on society, the impact on unemployment.
I think the MSL role is so important. And until you've interacted with an MSL, I don't think you realize just how important that role is.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Unscripted Podcast. Today we have a very, very special guest. Very happy to welcome Dr. David Fajgenbaum, who is the co-founder and president of Every Cure and one of the youngest tenured professors ever at Penn Medicine. But he's also battling a deadly rare disease and is alive today thanks to a repurposed treatment he discovered on his own and describes in his best-selling book, which we'll get into, Chasing My Cure. He's been profiled by the New York Times, Good Morning America, Today, Forbes 30 Under 30. He's even been awarded the Philadelphia Citizen of the Year and named to Time 100 Health. He has degrees from Georgetown, Oxford. He has an MD from UPenn and an MBA from Wharton. David, very happy to welcome you to the show and look forward to our discussion today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. This will be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, David, let's begin with your personal journey and how that ultimately got you to writing the book, Chasing My Cure. You've lived through what I think many would consider a medical miracle. So for a lot of the listeners out there that maybe are unfamiliar with your story, can you take us back to when you were first diagnosed and ultimately what led you to write the book, Chasing My Cure?
Sure. So I was a healthy third year med student at Penn, and I wanted to become an oncologist in memory of my mom. She had died from cancer just a few years before, and I was well on my way to that dream when I got critically ill out of nowhere. My liver, my kidneys, my bone marrow, my heart, and my lungs all began to shut down for an unknown cause, and I got so sick that my doctors told my family to say their goodbyes to me, and a priest read me my last rites when I was 25 years old.
Wow.
Thankfully, I got the diagnosis of idiopathic multicenter calcium disease right around that lowest point. I got a lot of chemotherapy, which thankfully saved my life. But then I kept relapsing over and over again, back in the ICU, weeks and weeks at a time with multi-organ failure. And after the fourth time that I almost died, that's when, and about 2 years into my battle, that's when I decided to dedicate my life to trying to find a treatment that could save me. And I discovered a repurposed drug that had been around for decades called sirolimus, a drug developed for organ transplantation that I thought could treat my disease. And I've just crossed 11 and a half years that I've been in remission now on that medicine.
Wow,
And
congratulations.
thank you. You know, it feels like a dream. I mean, first off, August 13th of 2010 is when I got sick, and I nearly died 5 times in those first 3 years. There is no way, if in any time during that period someone told me, well, that 15 years later I would be, sitting here with you, healthy, alive. I wouldn't have believed it. My doctor certainly wouldn't have either. But discovering this drug, saving my life in existing medicine, is really what drove me to want to write this book, to share the lessons I learned about life from almost dying, but also to help to raise awareness about the fact that the drugs we have within reach oftentimes can be used for more diseases than they're currently used for.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So I've worked in the pharmaceutical industry for many, many years prior to running the ACMA, and I know all about, going to the FDA, trying to get those approvals, trying to expand, the label to have more indications. Why is that the case? Why is it that, a lot of times pharma companies don't tap the full potential of their particular products?
Well, as you know, it's tremendous effort and resources that are required for every single approval and every single label change. And so companies have to be very, very thoughtful around, okay, I've got this product or this compound, and I think it can work in any one of these 5 or 10 conditions. What's the first one that I'm going to go after? And how many more can I go after? They have to get it approved. So, you pick the very best opportunity to get the approval, and then you have to start making challenging decisions about which other ones am I going to go for a label change. And
Yeah.
as you know, within the industry that's highly regulated, you can't utter a word about that drug being effective in another disease unless you've gotten a label change. But it's a lot of work, it's expensive. And so companies have to make these tough decisions about pursuing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 indications out of the maybe 3, 5, 10, 15 possible indications. And so it's that companies are forced to leave opportunities on the table just because they can't pursue all of them. And B, science is always progressing. So we're always learning about new roles that interleukin 6 might play in this disease or that disease.
Right.
But once a drug becomes generic, research stops. And even once a drug gets close to becoming generic, research stops. So the issue is that you got to have it, you have to develop it within the window that the drug is under exclusivity. And yeah, no one's going to do the work once the drug's generic.
Yeah. And I mean, listen, that's unfortunately the reality that we live in the pharma industry, because the majority of the revenue that they make comes from their branded products. You're absolutely right. And that's just the way it is. Now, what do you think, I guess, given that I'm sure you saw a few weeks ago, the FDA Commissioner, Marty McCary, put out an announcement about wanting to accelerate drug approval for particular drugs. Obviously, your conditions are rare disease. They talk a lot about rare disease, certain types of,
Yep.
cancers, because now they want to shrink that approval time from a year to about 2 months. What are your thoughts on that, I guess, in terms of what it's going to mean for patients with rare disease, and what it's going to mean maybe for companies in terms of potentially pursuing other indications?
Well, I think all of us, if you're a human, then that means you're susceptible to a rare disease, and every one of us that either has a rare disease or susceptible to a rare disease, we should all be excited about the idea of getting drugs to patients more quickly. At the same time, as you know, sometimes you can go too fast, and so I think being aware that we move, that we should move at the right pace, I think is important. But I think we got to find that right balance. And if you are going to try to accelerate approvals, something I've liked that FDA has done when they do accelerate approvals, oftentimes requiring some sort of phase 4 studies that are confirmatory and making it a conditional approval. That way you can get the drug to patients now, but you can then continue to do the work to confirm that the medicine is as effective as you think it'll be later. I think that's a really nice balance.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, there's some people that are concerned about the fact that having faster approvals might lead to situations down the road where there could be safety concerns that maybe,
Of course.
aren't discovered early on. So, I mean, to that point, obviously, you faced a life-threatening illness as a doctor, and I would imagine that would have changed kind of your perspective on the role of patients. And how did it change your perspective, I guess, in terms of how patients interact with the healthcare system? Because as you probably know, I mean, it was in the news now, what is it, almost 6, 7 months ago, with the whole United Healthcare debacle, where, that CEO got murdered, unfortunately, and obviously nothing justifies that. But a lot of patients are frustrated, right? Because they're not getting good access to care. They're not getting what they would consider to be quality care. When you were a patient, what was your experience like, and how has that helped you, I guess, as a doctor, maybe become more empathetic towards your patients and their experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, this is tough. It's a challenging subject. Uh, every patient that is suffering from a challenging illness, whether it's rare or common, we all want effective, safe treatments, and we want them to also be covered. And so we're in this system where some of the most effective, safe treatments are some of the most expensive treatments, which means that insurance companies won't cover them. And maybe some of the treatments that are very cost effective or cost efficient, that are inexpensive, or maybe the very treatments that we spend the least amount of time researching. And so it's a complicated scenario where patients are sort of stuck in the middle between, like, wait a minute, I just want a drug that helps me and I want it to be covered by an insurance company. And so you're right, it creates a lot of frustration. But I think it's important for us all to recognize just how complicated it is. And it's not that any one player or part of the industry is evil or doing the wrong thing. We just all are part of a really complicated system that is perfectly engineered for the current results that it's giving, and we have to think about how do we either re-engineer it, or how do we create new pathways. And so one of the reasons that I started this nonprofit, Every Cure, is that I recognize, and many of us recognize, that the drugs that we have at our local CVS can treat more diseases than they're currently being used for, but there's no one incentivized to find those new uses for these medicines.
Yeah.
So we've got to have a nonprofit that's looking for these things that aren't rewarded within our system, and that's okay. We just got to create a bypass pathway where we can take things forward where there maybe isn't a financial reward, but we can do it as a nonprofit using government funding and philanthropic funding. So I don't know. That's a long way to say that I think that there's reasons that patients are frustrated, just like you mentioned. But we've got to figure out ways to either bypass the system or fix the system.
So let's talk a little bit more about that, about some of the work that you're doing with your nonprofit, Every Cure. In doing some research, I noticed too that you talk a lot about AI and how AI can maybe accelerate helping to find new treatments for patients. So maybe talk to us about that, about the nonprofit, kind of what the mission is, some of the important work that you're doing, and then again, maybe how you're leveraging AI now to accelerate some of that work.
Sure. So Every Cure is a nonprofit that's on a mission to save and improve lives with repurposed drugs, the drugs we already have. We want to continue to take on some of the most devastating conditions out there with the medicines that are sitting at our pharmacy shelf, and we utilize artificial intelligence to identify the very best repurposing opportunities. And when I say that, what I mean is that we built an AI platform that scans the world's knowledge of every drug, every disease, every gene, every protein, every biomedical concept is part of this platform. And we quantify the likelihood of every drug, all 4,000 of them, to treat every human disease, all 18,000 of them. So
I
it ends
see.
up being about 75 million scores that our AI platform generates from 0 to 1. So the things that are closer to a 0.99, our platform thinks that drug's likely to work for that disease. The things that are closer to a 0.00, less likely to work. But you can quantify every drug for every disease. And then our medical team can look at the things at the very top and say, wow, this drug for this disease looks really promising. Um, let's look into it further. Maybe we need to do laboratory work. Maybe we need to do clinical trials. Maybe we need to raise awareness about this medicine. And so it's a way to use AI to help us in this challenge of all these drugs and all these diseases to find the very best ones and to decide which ones are the best use of philanthropic and government dollars to move them closer to reaching patients.
And that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you, in terms of clinical trials, where are you looking now to get support to run these clinical trials? Aren't obviously cheap. And with what's happening in the government, I know right now, there's obviously been some slashing of funds. Who are you turning to, or who are you looking to partner with to try to run some of these clinical trials?
Yeah, this is a great question. So we continue to be very thankful for ongoing support from the federal government that we've had for now over a year. And I think the federal government is one of the most obvious places to partner on what we're doing because it's U.S. citizens that are benefiting from these medicines. So thankfully, we continue to partner with the U.S. government. Uh, we also have engaged with a number of philanthropists, with people who say, like, I don't have a specific disease or a specific drug that I care about, but I just want to help people with the medicines we already have. So we
Mhm.
found this has resonated with a number of philanthropists. And the third category that we haven't really engaged deeply, but that I would love to, is working within the pharmaceutical industry. So that's both with drug companies that own these products, that know these products better than anyone else does because they've developed them,
Right.
but also CROs that can help us to run these trials for, let's say, lower costs. So that way, rather than doing one expensive trial, we can maybe do two or three less expensive trials and get the greatest societal benefit for the dollars that we spend on this. So that last bucket, I think, probably within the industry probably accounts for a lot of folks listening. And I'll just emphasize again that we're a nonprofit looking to use the drugs we have in new ways, particularly old generic drugs. And so working with the original manufacturer, the innovator who created that drug, to understand more about that drug. It's no longer profitable. I understand that, but can we learn the things that you learned while you were developing it so that way we can help to get that amazing product you developed to more people?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's so, so, so important what you said. I mean, coming from the pharma industry on the medical side is where I came from, medical clinical side. In the end of the day, ultimately, what we want is what's best for patients. And if there's a way that we can expand the usage of the product, or maybe something we haven't thought about, or share what we know, because you're right, obviously, we know the data inside and out for these products from their inception. That's huge in terms of being able to bring, potentially new uses of the drug in the patient population. And to that point, what do you think, David, are some of the biggest obstacles in drug development today in the approval system in the US, especially for the rare or I guess overlooked diseases?
Yeah, there's so many obstacles. I think, I mean, the number one thing that comes to mind for me is that the taking drugs that are going to help the most patients or patients generate the most impact are not necessarily the opportunities that move forward. And it's because in our system, we have to, it's so expensive to do clinical trials. It's so expensive to get FDA approval
Right.
that companies have to maximize profitability. And they might have to pick diseases that maybe that's not even the best use for that medicine. Maybe there's another disease that could have a greater impact, but based on the size of the disease or maybe based on the competition within that disease and the pricing of drugs, that they have to choose to go after a disease, or maybe it's not even the perfect fit. So I think that's probably the biggest obstacle I see, is just that we aren't in a system where we direct our drugs necessarily at the greatest value. Now, people listening, and I think rightfully so, may say, well, actually, you can generally get the most profitability for a product when you create the most value. So what I'm saying is probably not entirely true. But I think just the fact that there's this disconnect between, it's so expensive to do drug development, it requires so many resources that it isn't always able to be directed at what's the best opportunity to help people.
Yeah.
And that's just a product of our system. It's not a product of anyone doing the right thing or the wrong thing. That's just the
Yeah.
system we're in.
Yeah, I think what a lot of people don't realize is sometimes when you have high demand in the population, which is like to your point, pharma companies are going after indications where there's high demand. That actually gives you leverage then with PBMs and
Yep.
payers to right. So it's like the chicken or the egg because if you go after something that doesn't have high demand, you don't have a lot of leverage, it becomes harder to get that approved and get it through the system. So
Yep.
it's a difficult position. I think, for a lot of people, they don't recognize that within pharma. I know sometimes pharma gets painted as the big bad monster, right? But
Yep.
but really the truth is that there's a lot of players that are, involved. Again, I've talked about this a lot on my podcast, the pharmacy benefit managers, the middlemen, which really, play a big role in hiking up costs. And that makes it
Yep.
hard for pharma manufacturers to be able to do what they need to do in a streamlined way. One of the things that we focus on at the ACMA is the importance of certifying, credentialing pharma industry professionals that interact with doctors. And as you know, there was the opioid crisis, what, 6, 7 years ago, that kind of broke open in the U.S. What's your take on why that's important to have credentialed or certified reps or medical science liaisons working with the healthcare community?
Well, I can tell you, I've had the opportunity to work with some MSLs from Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Yusuf Pharma, Recordati Rare Disease, and I have been so impressed with the people I've worked with and with what they bring to the table. Being able to have professionals who come in with some medical science training backgrounds, and then they can focus, like, laser focus on one or two products. They learn so much about those products, and they oftentimes help to cross pollinate even between the KOLs that like really know
Yeah.
these diseases well. Like the MSLs sometimes are thinking more about the disease than even the key opinion leaders, right? And um, I think the MSL role is so important. And until you've interacted with an MSL, I don't think you realize just how important that role is. But then
Yes.
when you're on the receiving end of like understanding from them, learning from them, seeing how they synthesize knowledge, you just realize that this is a critical function. And I have to admit, I didn't know about the certification process that you guys do until you reached out about this podcast. So I'm really glad I learned, but I'm sure that I've benefited from the certification process because I've interacted with so many medical affairs professionals that I've been so impressed with.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and knock on wood, the ACMA has really become the standard in the industry for certifying, credentialing the MSLs in the country, and I'm happy to hear that because at the end of the day, it's there to really help them raise the bar in what they do and interacting with people like you. So that's great to hear. Let's talk a little bit about mindset and resilience, and I've heard you in other interviews talking about turning hope into action, and I guess one of the things I'm wondering is how do you stay grounded and driven despite kind of the uncertainty with your health and everything that's going on? Maybe talk to people listening out there that may be younger in their career and they're facing some adversity. How do you face that with that mindset, that strong mindset of resilience, and be able to overcome that?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I've found over my life when I've faced tough challenges that I needed three things to help me to get through them. So the first is that you have to have a clear vision for what you're working towards. So if you're working pharmaceutical industry all day, every day, you got to be thinking about that patient with that horrible disease that's getting better on your product. You got to have that vision. You got to be always thinking about that thing you're working towards. And yes, you might be traveling to Santa Fe to meet with a doctor about this or that, but that's not what you're doing. What you're doing is you're helping a patient with a horrible disease to be
Yep.
to live better, to experience life. So A, it's like what's your vision? What are you working for? B, you've got to have an amazing team of people by your side. I've found that at your lowest points, you got to be able to lean on people you love, and they've got to be able to hold you up when you don't have the strength to be held up. I mean, there was times I spent months in the ICU where my sisters were holding my hands and sitting beside me. My girlfriend was holding my hand, sitting beside me, and I got strength from the strength of their grip. Feeling
Sure.
their hands holding me helped me to say, I'm going to take another breath. I'm going to breathe, even despite the pain. I'm going to keep fighting despite the fact that I want to give up. And that's no matter what you're dealing with in life, any challenge, you got to have amazing people by your side. And then I found that the third thing you really need is to take things one step at a time. I mean, literally, if you are laying in the ICU and you're told you've got 6 months in front of you where you're going to be in the most unbearable pain and you're going to be on the brink of death, I would have never had the mental fortitude to keep fighting. I just don't have that kind of strength. But I had an amazing family by my side. I had a vision for the future, and I was taking things one breath at a time. And I think that those three things can help you to get through anything.
I love that. I love that. And I think for a lot of patients, especially or family members that have, relatives that have a rare disease or dealing with something that's difficult, what advice would you give them? Because a lot of them, they don't know how to navigate the healthcare system. I was just on television the other day. We were talking about Medicare and Medicaid, and I was shocked by what the interviewer told me, which was that 50% of people that were surveyed in this one survey in the US, they don't know the difference between Medicare, Medicaid. They don't understand what the benefits are. So, like, what advice would you give patients on how to get educated on these things?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, just general advice for a patient or a loved one of a patient is you've got to be your own advocate. All of us want to be able to walk in a doctor's office and have the doctor take care of everything. That's what we all want. And that's probably what we all deserve. You
Right.
walk in, the doctor gives you everything you need, you're cured, you walk out, you got a plan. The unfortunate reality is that for the vast majority of conditions, that's not going to happen. The doctor that you walk in to see, in your town is
Mhm.
unlikely to be the perfect or best person to give you all the answers. And frankly, for a lot of diseases, there's no one that has all the answers. And so,
No.
with that in mind, you've got to be your advocate. You got to be your champion. As much as we don't want to be, we just want to see our doctor. We want our doctor to give us everything we need. It's not going
Right.
to happen. So if we realize it's not going to happen, and we realize the only person that is harmed when that doesn't happen is ourselves, right? Like it, it's us who's going to not benefit from the fact that the answers aren't going to come to us from this first doctor. So that means we've got to be our own advocates. We got to be willing to ask questions to our doctor. How many patients have you treated with this disease? What's your experience when you try this drug that you want to try on me? Are there other drugs that we should try? Hey, would you ever consider emailing the expert for this disease? I just found this, paper online written by someone, and you name where they are. Would you ever email them to see what they think? Those sorts of like advocating for yourself, and it might involve getting in a car and driving to Austin, Texas to go see the doctor there who might be able to
Right.
help you out, get your solution. So the first is you have to advocate for yourself. The second, I think you got to find those people that have gone through your disease, turn to other patients, and turn to patient organizations to see if they can provide guidance. But to your specific question around better understanding the healthcare system, it is so complicated that I have to admit that there are times where I'm like, how do all these things interact? PBMs and Medicare and Medicaid. It's
Right. Right.
it's
Right.
complicated, and I think that I don't know of a single resource that does a great job of explaining the complicated system we're in. But I do know that there are great people within organizations. Actually, you mentioned United Healthcare earlier. Um, we've had United Healthcare coverage in the past, and I remember engaging with a nurse navigator at United Healthcare who helped me and my wife to understand what our options were for my daughter and the services that she could get or not get. And you know, you don't, and same with my employer at Penn, also talking to a navigator, you can do this, you can do that. I think that rather than trying to get general education on how does this work, because I don't think any of us really understand how it all works, if we can figure out if there's someone, our employer, our insurance company, is there a navigator somewhere that can walk through what it means for me or what it means for my family? And
Yeah.
that gets back to that first point about advocating for yourself. Like, no one wants to spend time learning about this stuff, but you got to do it. And if you can do it with someone who can educate you, I think you'll be in a better position.
Yeah, I was saying the other day, I think it's similar to me to finance education. It's something that, we probably should learn somewhere, either the employers, school, but something to help understand again, because it's complex how the healthcare system works. Now, David, I don't know how old you are, but you've done a lot, and it's really impressive. What do you think, or what do you hope your legacy will be? I guess not just as a physician and author, but maybe as someone who challenged really the status quo rather from within, right? I mean, what you did is remarkable, being able to find a cure for yourself and finding this particular molecule for Castleman's. So, what do you want your legacy to be? How do you want people to remember you?
Well, thanks for asking that, and thanks for saying those nice things. I mean, number one legacy is the people whose lives I've saved, and the people who get to walk their child down the aisle on their wedding day, or they get to go to college when they didn't think they'd be alive, or in my case, get to have children years after I was supposed to die. So that I hope will be my legacy, and certainly to those families and those patients, the experiences that they had after we saved their life with an existing medicine. That to me is the thing that matters the most. At the same time, I think that the way that we've gone about saving those patients' lives with drugs that we already had, I didn't have to develop brand new drugs or do really anything too complicated. I just had to uncover a new use for the medicines we already have. I hope that that sort of approach to medicine, where it's just common sense, urgent ways of helping people who need to be helped now, I hope that that can be part of my legacy, that people will take some of those ideas and run with them, and that we don't get stuck in this slow way of working that is rightfully slow. We want to be rigorous with new drug development, but once something is approved for one thing, let's start moving really quickly to see what else it can be useful for, and rigorously to make sure
Right.
we can prove that it works.
A lot of pharma execs are going to watch this. Thousands of people are going to see this. What's a message you have for them in terms of one thing they can do to help, support the work that you're trying to do at the foundation?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I would love to identify our very first deep partnership with a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company. We've engaged extensively with dozens of companies over the last few years, and I have a number of dear friends within the industry. But really, a true partner that we can work with, where that drug company can share data with us about the drugs they've developed that are now generic, that they're no longer working on, that we can share data with them about maybe the drugs that they have in development or that are now approved, looking
Yeah.
at new indications for their current drugs that are profitable, sharing insights, sharing best practices, thinking critically about how do we help more people more quickly. I would love for us to establish that partnership. So if you're at one of the big pharmaceutical companies and you're interested and you're hearing this, please reach out to me, David at everycure.org. I also, in the very short term, myopic way, we're in the process of hiring a VP of clinical development. We've got a number. I mentioned earlier that we use AI platform. We already have 8 programs that we've identified through our AI platform, and there
Wow.
are a few programs where we need to start clinical trials, or we want to start clinical trials in the next few months, and we need a really great clinical development lead. So if you're listening to this and you're a VP of clinical development, or you're interested in clinical development and have clinical trial experience, I hope you'll look up everycure.org. Reach out to me, David at everycure.org. We need someone great and ideally based in Boston.
You got it. I give you my personal word. I'm gonna make sure that this gets out to, the pharma community and make sure that they are aware of the important work that you're doing. Because I think it's really important. I mean, look, in the pharma industry, we always talk about the fact that you got to put the patient first. You got to put the patient first. And there's no other better way to do this, right, than this. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we have a lot of important molecules out there. Let's maximize their potential. So I think that's absolutely important. David, it was really great having you. And I really enjoyed the conversation. And everybody else, will see you guys soon and look forward to maybe have you back on the show again, when you do more with the foundation and get an update. Thanks again, David.
That'd be awesome. Thanks so much, Paul.